wealthy man pushed open the kitchen door and stopped in shock at what he saw: his 7-year-old daughter crouched on the floor in spilled milk, holding her baby brother close while the little boy cried loudly with only a single word: "Stop." The perfect image of their home shattered completely, exposing hidden threats, hunger, and a calculated plot to steal the family's wealth. Someone had turned a house into a prison for 2 helpless children. Before we dive into the story, please leave a comment with your opinion, and on a scale from 1 to 10, how many points would you give this tale? Now, let's begin. The grand house on Brooklyn Heights. That night was quieter than normal. Alexander Reed, 40 years old, a millionaire well known in New York's property world, entered after canceling an important meeting with a partner. The tall man, whose face was often as cold as stone, still carried the same tiredness he felt every day. He had lost his wife less than 10 months earlier, her passing from postpartum issues leaving a hole in him nothing could fill, and to escape the grief, Alexander drowned himself in work, then in a new marriage with Victoria Hayes, a stunning 35-year-old woman admired for her perfect looks and a voice as sweet as sugar. The first thing Alexander saw when he walked into the living room was the emptiness. Usually at this time, he found his daughter Sophia on the blue sofa, holding her 10-month-old brother Jacob, the 7-year-old with gentle brown hair. Just like her mother's, often sat quietly waiting for him to return, sometimes only to get a cold nod. But tonight, the sofa was bare. Alexander frowned slightly. He slipped off his Burberry coat, laying it over the chair, still in his Armani suit, his polished shoes clicking against the wood floor. The strange stillness made him uneasy. Then from the far end of the hall came a sharp noise, Victoria's piercing scream, and right after that, the rough crying of a child. Jacob's broken sobs. Alexander hurried forward, his chest tightening with strange urgency. He pushed open the kitchen door and froze in shock on the cold tiles. Milk spread in white patches. The bottle had fallen rolling across the ground. Sophia, dressed in the worn yellow dress he had once purchased at Macy's for her 6th birthday, trembled as she knelt beside Jacob. The baby's cheeks were bright red, his tiny arms thrashing as he cried so hard it looked as if he could not breathe. Near them sat a small bowl of milk, clearly taken from elsewhere. Victoria stood across from them, her red dress clinging to her slim figure, her hair tied neatly in a high bun, but her face no longer showed its usual softness. Instead, it burned with fierce anger. In her grip was a glass pitcher, drops of milk still sliding down to the floor. Sophia cried out in fear, her little hands still shielding Jacob. "I'm sorry, I only wanted my baby brother to have a full stomach." Alexander froze a moment, then shouted, "What are you doing? Victoria, put that glass down this instant. Who gave you permission to pour milk over my child's head?" His voice boomed through the kitchen, sharp and unforgiving. "That is my child, do you hear me?" Victoria recoiled, a flash of fear passing over her face, then quickly regained her poise. She placed the glass aside, drew in a breath, and spoke softly as though explaining, "My dear, I was only correcting her. Sophia secretly took the milk I keep for skincare and bathing. She gave it to Jacob without asking. I'm worried she will develop careless habits and turn it into a pattern. Do you think it doesn't hurt me?" She stepped nearer, lightly brushing her hand against her husband's sleeve, her eyes wet with shine. "If you dismiss me like this, in front of them, they'll think I have no authority. I only wish to guide them well." Alexander's anger faltered, as though a veil had been thrown across it. He still saw the milk trickling down his daughter's face, still heard Jacob's rough sobs, yet Victoria's fingers resting gently on his arm made him pause. What are you saying?" he muttered, his eyes shifting. Victoria leaned in further. The girl took something without asking. "I simply reminded her to honor limits. If we are not united, the children will only grow worse." Alexander looked toward Sophia. The little girl was soaked, clutching Jacob tightly, her wide gaze locked on him. He offered her a towel, lowering his tone, though keeping it firm. "Sophia, you cannot use your stepmother's belongings without asking again. Next time, if anything happens, you come to me. I will decide. Do you understand?" Sophia pressed her lip and gave a tiny nod. "I'm sorry, I only wanted..." Alexander drew a breath, trying to add more, but no words came. "Victoria, quickly cut in her tone, turning soft like a gentle rain. See, she already understands she was wrong. We are guiding her together, aren't we? He nodded, only to end it, his eyes becoming distant once again. Sophia lowered her head, her tears blending. With the milk on her cheek, she hugged Jacob closer against her chest, whispering so faintly only he could hear, "We just need to bear it." Alexander left the kitchen quickly, his hand gripping the door so hard the wood gave a sharp echo. He walked straight to the second floor, each step heavy as though carrying the burden of the whole house. The long hallway glowing yellow from the light reflecting against expensive portraits lined neatly blurred before him, for Alexander could picture nothing, except Sophia's face streaked with milk. He entered the study, a large room with dark wood shelves and a desk supporting a sleek silver MacBook. Alexander sat down, opened the laptop, his fingers stopping for a moment before pressing the keys on. The screen appeared a folder he had ignored for months. The folder carried the name Olivia Reed, his first wife, the graceful woman who had stood beside him for 10 years. He opened a short video and the image filled with Olivia's face, her long black hair flowing gently, her brown eyes gentle weary, yet still filled with love. Her voice rose softly warm as if it continued to echo through the room. "Alexander, I feel uneasy. If I am gone one day, please watch over Sophia and Jacob. Never let the brightness in her eyes disappear. Her gaze will speak for her, and please never blame the boy, he carries no fault." Alexander sat still, unable to move for a moment. The whole room seemed to stop breathing. He pressed his hand against his forehead, his eyes closing the image of Sophia kneeling beside her brother in the kitchen, rushed back, her eyes heavy with fear and a desperate need for safety, just as Olivia had spoken. A cry rang out from below, sharp and familiar. Jacob Alexander paused only briefly, then walked toward the window. He looked outside into the yard and saw Sophia carrying her brother, trying to calm Jacob's sobs, her frail shoulders bending under the weight of the 10-month-old boy, the girl's thin face, her eyes red from tears. Alexander called out gently, his voice stripped of firmness, sounding instead like a plea. "Sophia, come here." The girl halted, raised her head, her wide eyes meeting her father's for only an instant before turning away. Sophia shook her head, holding Jacob tighter. Then moved on, vanishing into the long corridor. Alexander exhaled deeply, his hand hanging in the air before dropping lifelessly to his side. A crushing helplessness settled on his chest. He longed to keep his daughter close, yet did not know how to begin. The door creaked open behind him. A voice entered, sweet but laced with reproach. "Are you thinking about them again?" Victoria walked in, dressed in beige silk, her hair flowing loosely across her shoulders, the faint scent of Chanel No. 5 surrounding her. Her face looked flawless, though her eyes flickered with annoyance. "Alexander, we already agreed the past must rest. You swore we would begin anew together. Do you truly wish to drown in old grief?" Alexander remained quiet. He turned his gaze toward a picture frame on his desk. Inside, Olivia held Sophia on her 3rd birthday, both laughing brightly. A gentle Olivia, a pure Sophia, and himself. Then still a man who smiled. The space between that memory and this reality pierced his chest with every breath. Victoria stepped closer, her hand gently resting on his shoulder, her tone firm but low. "You must allow me to handle everything. We deserve a new chapter, not endless sorrow." Alexander said nothing. He sat taller, lifted Olivia's frame, brushing the glass. Victoria's shadow rippled on the surface, yet in his eyes only Olivia's smile remained, and her words rang clearly again. "Don't let the light in her eyes fade. She will speak for them." Alexander clenched the frame, his heart sinking. He knew he could not keep avoiding forever. Alexander turned off the screen, replaced Olivia's photo, and walked into the hall. As he stepped down, he heard Jacob's cries fading from the kitchen, softer as Sophia carried him away. Alexander paused halfway on the staircase, his hand resting on the railing for a moment before slipping away. He kept walking, his wife's last words echoing clearly in his mind. The ringing of the school bell signaled the start of another period. Inside the cafeteria, Sophia stood close to the water fountain, her stomach aching from hunger on a nearby table. A classmate had left a sandwich half-eaten. Her eyes shifted nervously. She hesitated, then slowly pulled the sandwich closer just as her fingers touched it. The other child turned back unexpectedly. Sophia's face turned red. She clutched the sandwich tightly against her chest as though hiding a secret, her small voice shaking and quiet enough only for the child to hear. "I'm sorry, my baby brother is so hungry, I just wanted to take it home for him." The classmate froze, unsure what to say, before a calm, steady female voice spoke from behind. Let me see. A woman in her mid-30s, hair neatly tied back, a name tag pinned to her blouse reading, Emily Parker, homeroom teacher of Sophia's class, stepped forward. She didn't scold. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a carton of milk and a packet of cookies, and placed them into Sophia's hands. "Drink this, and then finish your own meal. I'll arrange another sandwich for your classmate. Next time, just tell me earlier, all right?" Sophia lifted her gaze, her eyes shining with tears, and gave the smallest nod. Emily leaned closer, lowering her tone. "I'll ask the cafeteria staff to set aside an extra portion for you, and if you need, you may also take a carton of milk home for your brother." Sophia held the milk close, as if protecting a promise, whispered a soft thank you, and slipped quietly to the corner of the table, still fidgeting with the worn strap of her backpack. Later that afternoon, Sophia clutched her nearly torn bag and ran quickly along the row of houses in Brooklyn Heights. She tapped lightly at the apartment door across the hallway. Patricia Gomez, the elderly retired neighbor, opened up her thin-rimmed glasses, sliding down slightly, flour dust still clinging to her hands from baking. "Oh, it's you again, Sophia." The little girl lowered her eyes to her shoes, her voice barely audible. "Grandma, do you have any bread left? Jacob is hungry." Patricia sighed, walked to the cupboard, and pulled out a bag of warm muffins. "Here, take these, give your brother his share first, then keep one for yourself. Understand?" Sophia hugged the bag tightly, bowing deeply. "Thank you." Patricia stood at the doorway, watching the little girl leave, her eyes reflecting concern. A few minutes later, Alexander stepped into the elevator, his phone still in hand as the doors slid open. He nearly bumped into Patricia waiting in the lobby. She looked at him closely before speaking, her tone plain and firm. "Mr. Reed, your daughter is far too thin. She came to me today asking if I had bread." Alexander paused for only a heartbeat, then tightened his grip on the phone, holding it as if it gave him balance. "You must be mistaken. Maybe she was just acting spoiled." Patricia's brow furrowed, but she chose not to argue. "I have raised children, and now grandchildren. I can tell the difference between greed and hunger," she said before turning away, leaving Alexander alone in the lobby, unease slowly tightening in his chest. When he returned home, he pulled open the refrigerator. The milk carton was almost untouched, while the small tray meant for the children sat completely empty. He shut the refrigerator, the dull sound echoing in his head like a mark dragging across glass from the living room. Victoria's voice floated through the air, still on her phone, her tone sugary while mentioning a party invitation for another married pair. Alexander didn't step inside. He moved through the hall until he reached the children's door. It was closed. No sound of laughter within. He wondered why this home had every luxury, yet the kitchen so rarely smelled of warm milk. Night slipped. Down like a heavy cover, Victoria had already gone upstairs to clean her makeup. Faint music humming from the small speaker on her dressing table, leaking through the slight opening of her door while crossing the kitchen to pour water. Alexander saw the light was off. Only the dim glow of the dishwasher moving in the corner remained. He filled the glass, ready to return upstairs, when a faint shuffling caught his ear near the back entrance. He froze, listening. The sound came again. Cautious and frightened, he slowly unlatched the door. A rush of cold night air drifted in, mixed with the metallic scent of trash cans and the faint soap from the neighbor's drying laundry. A tiny figure was curled on the steps. Sophia pressed into the corner, hand inside a thin plastic bag loosely tied with leftover bread, her eyes blinking quickly, startled beside her. Jacob lay in an old stroller, his head resting on a thin blanket, eyes puffy from long crying. Alexander stood unmoving at the door, frame reality striking him hard. Sophia turned quickly, hiding the bread behind her back lips, shaking. "Dad, please, Jacob is so hungry." The words jammed in his throat, his mouth dry. He saw her small hand tremble, saw the boy's swollen eyes heavy with weariness, and all around was silence tearing him apart. Olivia's voice rose again inside. Don't let the light in her eyes fade. Sophia didn't weep. She only held the bag tighter, covering her brother, as if this habit was carved into her. Jacob wheezed, stretching one tiny hand into the air before letting it fall. Alexander tried to speak, but no sound formed. Before him stood a rich home packed with shining objects. Yet at the doorstep his children lived on scraps. His hand gripped the frame, his breath rough and slow. Truth now impossible to deny. Jacob whimpered again. Sophia bent quickly, soothing him, whispering softly, "Don't cry. I brought you bread." Alexander stayed there, chest pounding every beat, carrying another question without answer. He lowered slightly, fingers grazing the cold wood frame, knowing he could no longer hide from those eyes. He lingered another moment, then leaned, so the faint kitchen light spread onto the steps, breathing in slow. He steadied his tone, speaking, "Gently, Sophia, don't stay out here, come inside." The girl pressed the bag against her chest and slowly pushed Jacob's stroller over the threshold. Alexander shut the door, his fingers still unsteady from the cold air and from what he had just uncovered. He pulled a chair from the dining table, sliding it gently toward Sophia. "Sit down." She hesitated before setting the bag of bread on the surface, her other hand gripping the stroller handle to calm her brother. Jacob gave a faint wheeze, his cheeks pink with exhaustion. Alexander filled a small glass with warm water and placed it before his daughter, then sat across from her, studying the eyes that refused to meet his. His voice had softened, stripped of its usual edge. "Is there something you need to tell me?" Sophia lowered her head, her thin hands laced together tightly. She glanced at Jacob, then fixed her gaze on the table. Silence spread. Through the room, Alexander weighted his chest heavy, each beat dragging slow. "I only want to know if you're all right." Sophia pressed her lips together and shook her head slightly. "I'm fine." Her reply no louder than a breath. Footsteps clicked against the hallway floor. Victoria appeared, silk dress, flowing hair undone. She paused in the doorway watching, then smiled as if she had caught a sweet family moment. "It's late. Why are you both still awake?" Alexander raised his eyes, answering steady, "Was just speaking with her." Victoria approached, rested a hand on Sophia's shoulder. Her tone soft. "She's stubborn. She acts out just to get more attention. Don't worry. I'll handle it later." Alexander looked at that hand, wishing to brush it away, but his throat stayed dry. He pushed his chair back, standing slowly, eyes drifting to Jacob as he spoke. "Give the boy some milk, then everyone should sleep." Leaving the kitchen, he climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last when he was gone. Victoria bent close to Sophia's ear, the smile vanishing, her voice thin and sharp as a blade. "If you speak tomorrow, Jacob gets no milk." Sophia froze her hand, gripping the stroller. Victoria swept past, opened the refrigerator, poured only a small measure of milk into a cup, then sealed the bottle, returning it exactly as it had been. Every move neat, rehearsed the following morning inside Emily Parker's classroom. Sophia sat quietly at the back row. During recess, she reached for a pencil, her sleeve slipping back enough to reveal a faint bluish bruise on her wrist. Emily noticed and stilled. She drew a breath, then crouched beside the desk. Her tone, calm. "Sophia, what happened to your hand?" The girl jerked her arm back, tugging the sleeve. "Quickly, I fell," she answered. Emily did not press. Instead, she opened a drawer, pulled out a small carton of milk and a slice of bread. "Take these for later, and if you need food for Jacob, you come to me. I'll ask the kitchen to save some." Sophia accepted, with a small nod, her eyes shining before lowering her head again, while the rest of the children ran outside. Emily returned to her desk and pulled open the private file drawer. She quickly jotted a few notes about Sophia, marking the date and time, describing the faint bruises on her wrist, and adding that the girl often asked for extra food at the bottom. She drew a line and wrote clearly, "Continue observation. If the pattern repeats, contact the counselor." That same afternoon, Alexander arrived home right on schedule. He went directly to his office, closed the door, and started the computer. A soft chime announced a new email. He meant to ignore it, but a second chime followed. Alexander opened his inbox. At the very top sat a message with no subject, only a strange address. He hesitated, then clicked inside. The body contained just one sentence. No picture. No attachment. If you are still a father, look more closely at your home. Alexander stared at the screen, the pale glow throwing sharp shadows across his face. His fingers tightened against the armrest. The words were simple, yet they pushed wide the door he had been trying to keep shut. Through the glass panel, he saw only the dim hallway on the desk. A photo of Olivia caught the light, her smile reflecting in the frame. The room filled with the sound of his breathing, steady, yet heavy like air before a storm. He closed the laptop after a long pause, rose from his chair, and moved toward the kitchen. On the counter, the milk bottle remained nearly full, but the small children's bowl was scrubbed spotless. He paused at the doorway and caught sight of Sophia pacing gently with Jacob in her arms. The boy whimpered until she set him down, then dragged a chair over and slid the bowl of porridge closer. She scooped only 2 bites for herself before pouring the remainder into Jacob's bottle. Alexander stayed behind the wall, listening to her faint whisper, "Drink it. I'm already full." Jacob quieted quickly, sucking on the bottle while Sophia swallowed water as though tricking her stomach. Alexander made a deliberate sound of footsteps. Sophia flinched, spinning around, bottle clutched tightly, her eyes flickering with unease. He stepped forward, his tone, "Even have you eaten?" She nodded fast. "I ate already." Alexander looked at the clean bowl, then at her thin hands gripping the bottle. By instinct, he gave a slow nod, but asked nothing more. Later that evening, Victoria busied herself on the phone with her friend Laura, chatting about an upcoming party. Alexander walked toward the children's room, telling himself he needed the teacher's communication sheet, a convincing excuse to check Sophia's drawer. The room appeared unusually neat. On the desk sat a crayon box, some scattered drawings, and a small frame showing Sophia at 3 years old, hugging her mother. Alexander opened the second drawer, searching for school papers. His fingertips brushed something thick and soft like worn cardboard. He carefully lifted it out. A small notebook, its blue cover frayed corners patched with tape. Alexander sat down slowly and opened the first page. The first page revealed messy handwriting. The uneven lines carried heavy strokes blotched with ink, as though the writer had tried desperately to hold on to something important. "Today my brother cried because he was hungry. She made me kneel because I asked for more milk. She warned me not to speak if I did. He would get nothing." Alexander turned the fragile page, then another and another, each day recorded in small fragments, each entry leaving a trace of fear. Some pages offered only a single sentence, trembling and distorted: "If I tell my brother, will starve." His hand halted over that line. The sound of Jacob's weary breathing filled his imagination. Sophia's bowed head and Olivia's old warnings echoed clearly for the first time. In many months, guilt rose inside him. Guilt mixed with a fear that could not be brushed aside by work, by meetings, or by endless dinners. He flipped to the back pocket of the notebook. Scraps were tucked inside Jacob's milk schedule, written in Sophia's careful but childish hand, a few receipts from the small store at the corner, and a sticky note marked, "Miss Emily said, I could bring 1 carton of milk home. Don't let her know, she'll be upset." Alexander set the note on the desk, his heart beat slow yet weighted. He raised his eyes and for the first time saw the room differently, neat and orderly. Yes, but stripped of joy. There was no light-hearted mark of childhood, no evidence of play, only silence. The sharp sound of heels approached the hallway. He quickly closed the notebook before placing it aside. Victoria appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, her lips shaped into a faint smile. "What are you doing in the girls' room?" Her tone floated softly, yet her narrowed eyes cut toward his hands like a blade. Alexander shifted the notebook behind him as instinct, his voice level and low, looking for the teacher's form. "Where did you place it?" Victoria stepped further. perfume trailing through the air. "I left it in the kitchen mailbox," she replied. "You could have asked me directly." No need to search a child's drawers. Her glance flicked to the desk, then fixed on him firm and unblinking. "We agreed I would manage the children. Do not let the past turn everything fragile again." Alexander's gaze did not leave hers. He saw behind her poise a veil of practiced control, something that seemed as natural to her as breathing. He moved half a step, closed the drawer with quiet finality, still holding the notebook, like a thread of truth. "I'll sign the form later," he said. His tone measured. "It's late tonight." He passed her and walked toward the hallway. She shifted slightly, smile still painted on her lips. "Don't let work drain you tomorrow. We have that." Dinner in Midtown. Alexander offered no answer. Each footstep carried weight down the corridor, every step, forcing him to measure how blind he had been to his daughter's fear. Inside his study, he closed the door with care and leaned against the wooden panel. Slowly he reopened the notebook. The childish writing met him again, awkward yet unshaken, every line painfully honest, every sentence refusing to disguise the truth. His grip tightened around the cover. His eyes did not look away. They sharpened, cold and certain, like the instant he sealed a major contract. Yet this was not a matter of figures or papers. This was his family. This was survival. He lowered his head and spoke softly to himself, the vow sounding more like a promise carved into stone. "I have to know the truth." The thought pressed against Alexander's chest as he closed his office door. He walked down the hallway. His steps measured, each one heavier than the last. When he reached the children's room, he placed the blue notebook on the table, adjusting its corners carefully as though reminding himself he could not falter any longer. Sophia was bent over Jacob, changing his diaper, her movements tender but awkward with exhaustion. When her eyes lifted and found her father, she froze, her lashes fluttering before lowering her head. Alexander drew a chair and sat across from her. He slid the notebook gently toward her, his tone soft. "Sophia, did you write these words? Are they true?" The girl's gaze flicked toward the notebook, then to Jacob. Her small fingers gripped the hem of her yellow dress. Her thin shoulders trembling. At first she only shook her head, lips pressed tight until color drained from them. Jacob suddenly began to fuss. His weak cry clawed at Alexander's heart. Sophia lifted him in haste, rocking him, trying to soothe him, but the cries only deepened until tears spilled from her eyes. She broke down, crossing a line she could no longer hold. "I'm not afraid of being punished. I'm only afraid my brother will starve, Dad. Please don't hate him." The words tumbled, broken yet clear. She pressed her face against Jacob's hair, sobs shaking her frame. Alexander stood unmoving. A vision struck him. Olivia's face in that recorded call, her gentle eyes carrying the same plea he had chosen to ignore. Don't let our daughter's light go out. Now that light was before him, fragile, shining, desperate. Alexander reached for the bottle on the table. Only a few drops remained. He rose quickly, went to the kitchen, poured milk, then returned, placing it into Sophia's hands. She gripped it as though it were a lifeline. Jacob latched on the cries, fading little by little. Silence filled the room, heavy enough for Alexander to hear his own heartbeat, pounding Victoria's. Heels clicked sharply down the hallway. Then the door flew open. Her lips curved faintly, but her eyes swept the scene. The notebook caught her gaze. Her expression hardened. She moved swiftly like a blade, aiming to snatch it. "What is this?" she snapped. She made it up. "She's jealous of me, so she lies." Alexander's hand locked over the notebook, pressing down until his knuckles turned white. His voice cut firm. "Leave it there." Victoria hesitated, startled by the chill in his eyes, then softened her, tone sliding into her practiced sweetness. "My love children imagined things. I was only disciplining her. You know how the past clouds judgment. Don't twist everything." Alexander did not raise his voice. He simply opened the notebook once more, turning to the jagged line, "If I speak, my brother will starve." He read slowly, each word weighted like it had been carved into stone. Victoria frowned, her control slipping. "You believe childish scribbles over me?" she demanded. Alexander closed the book calmly, placed it inside the small cabinet, and locked it. His tone final. "Tomorrow we will talk." His words resembled a contract sealed cold and irrevocable, but inside his heart another choice had already been sealed. Victoria glanced at the keys, suspicion flickering. She stepped forward, reaching for Jacob, but Sophia clutched him protectively. Alexander's eyes cut sharp, signaling, "Leave them alone. Don't touch the child." Victoria hesitated, her lips bent in a smile, though her gaze had hardened cold as glass. When she finally stepped out, Alexander moved to the window, phone in hand. He dialed a trusted number from the building. Moments later, a steady voice answered. "This is Noah Patel, technical manager. How may I assist, Mr. Reed?" Noah was Indian in his 40s, quiet and exact, with long experience maintaining security for residents. Alexander lowered his voice. "Tomorrow morning. I need discreet. Recording devices in the house, nothing large, just a few. Keep it confidential." Noah responded without hesitation. "Understood. I will arrive at 7. The call ended. Alexander slid the phone back into his pocket. His decision rooted firm. He turned toward the bed. Sophia sat with her back to the wall, Jacob resting against her shoulder, nearly asleep. Alexander knelt eye level, his voice low. "From now on, I'll be watching everything, I promise." Sophia raised her tired eyes, though faint light stirred. Within them, heels tapped outside. Victoria reappeared, carrying a bottle of thinned milk. She reached out smoothly. "Let me feed him." Alexander rose, blocking her path. "No need. He already drank." Victoria laughed lightly with frost in her tone. "You're overreacting," then seized Sophia's wrist, tugging her up. "Go to bed." Her grip, too strong, made Sophia flinch. The girl glanced back quickly, whispering so fast the words seemed to vanish. "If you still love me, look at my brother. His eyes tell you everything." The door closed. Alexander stood motionless, listening to his own breath. He opened a drawer, resting his palm on the notebook as though acknowledging testimony. Instead of shrinking from Olivia's memory, he allowed her voice to remain, guiding him. Tomorrow, the cameras would see what he had failed to face. Dawn came at 7 sharp. Noah Patel arrived carrying 2 tiny devices no larger than buttons. One went high on the kitchen cabinet, another in the living room, angled toward the sofa. Alexander observed silently. As the indicator lights blinked green when they turned steady, everything was live. He descended to the stair railing, posture calm, though his chest beat tight with expectation. By midday, he staged a departure, mentioning a meeting. Victoria stayed. Behind with the children, the hidden lenses opened a window into the home. What unfolded was ordinary on the surface, yet searing. To watch, Victoria's patience cracked. She struck Sophia simply because a spoon clattered against the floor. She thinned. The milk, poured it into the bottle, then deliberately set it beyond Jacob's reach as he whimpered, thirsty. She calmly opened her purse, withdrawing an envelope of cash. Alexander had once given her money intended for the children, yet now she slipped it into her purse and sent a brief message to her friend Laura Mitchell's spa this afternoon. "He's away." Her mocking laugh rang across the spotless kitchen tiles later. That day, Alexander returned and immediately phoned Henry Collins, the family lawyer, nearly 50 tall, lean, with sharp but kindly eyes. Henry had been Olivia's trusted friend. He arrived without delay. The 2 men sat before the glowing screen. Minutes passed in silence until the footage showed Victoria's hands gripping Sophia's shoulders, her voice cold about sending obedient children to boarding school. Henry's face tightened, half drained of color. His words, however, remained steady. "This isn't discipline, this is strategy aimed at appropriation. You must cut off her funding, freeze the secondary account at once, and gather broader proof regarding property." Alexander inclined his head, lifted his phone, and dialed Detective Daniel. Harris, about 40, handled child protection cases with steady patience. Alexander explained briefly, asked for confidentiality. Harris responded, measured, "Keep recording. Don't confront her. I'll arrange verification and coordinate with the prosecutor once evidence is sufficient." Alexander whispered thanks, hung up, and felt as though rails had been laid beneath his feet. Guiding his next steps that evening, Victoria dressed as though attending a gala. Though it was only dinner, she ladled soup, her voice syrupy. "I've been researching excellent boarding schools. Sophia needs structure. One day she'll thank us." Sophia's lips trembled, but she stayed quiet, slipping the tender meat into Jacob's bowl. Alexander set down his spoon, asked evenly, "Which schools, what tuition, who has advised you?" Victoria brightened, sensing ground. "Gained, a friend of mine handles everything. Paperwork, enrollment. It will be smooth." Sophia risked a glance at her father. Her eyes worn, yet still, clinging to hope. Alexander inhaled deeply, then nodded as though agreeing, and resumed his meal. Dinner passed under a veil of false peace, and for once he permitted the charade to continue. The next morning, Victoria left with Laura Mitchell door. Cameras captured them, laughing, spa bags swinging. "Speaking of treatment packages, he trusts me now. Laura, just a few more weeks. It's finished." That afternoon, Alexander visited the bank. He restricted the secondary card, set instant alerts, and transferred tuition savings into a secured account. Henry accompanied, reviewing authorizations. "Revoke every power of attorney signed before marriage. I'll prepare the letters tonight." His tone was calm, practiced against looming risk. Friday evening, light spilled through the apartment windows arranged for company. Victoria entered radiant. She introduced a guest, a man in a fitted dark suit, hair slick tie. "Neat, this is Richard Coleman, my personal attorney." Richard extended his hand. Alexander extended his hand, smiling politely, though his eyes scanned the room as though measuring the scale of an investment. Richard's tone was smooth, confident. "I can streamline the ownership structure, lower exposure, optimize taxation." Alexander leaned slightly, concealing his weariness beneath calm composure. "I'll review it if it proves sound." Richard's gaze slid toward Victoria. Their exchange rehearsed in advance. Then he reached into his briefcase, withdrawing a prepared folder. "Temporary transfer," he explained, voice velvet yet weighty. "This will simplify daily management, nothing more." His language, however, carried the gravity of possession. When Richard excused himself to fetch water, Victoria leaned close, her whisper insistent. "Just sign it. I'm exhausted from managing everything." Alexander's eyes flicked toward the hallway camera, silently recording. He lifted his wine glass, pretending ease. "I'll examine it after dinner. No urgency." That evening, dinner unfolded like theater. Victoria returned to the subject of boarding school, speaking of discipline and brighter futures. Sophia lowered her head, focusing on Jacob, spooning food carefully to avoid mistakes. Alexander asked brief questions. "Who suggested this? Where exactly?" "Did you meet Victoria?" Answered with effortless polish, her eyes glowing with anticipation. Richard observed, occasionally inserting words like efficient, safe, convenient. After dessert, Victoria placed the file on the table, her voice ringing with triumph. "Just signatures." Richard guided the folder toward Alexander, flipping to highlighted spaces. A pen slid across the polished wood. Here and here, Victoria produced her own gold-capped pen, her hand trembling faintly, excitement coursing through her. That instant, the study door opened. Alexander emerged, his steps deliberate, his presence cutting through the staged harmony. He ignored Richard and looked only at Victoria, his voice cool, unhesitant. "I've seen enough. It's time the masks were removed." Victoria froze, her pen grazing the edge of paper. Alexander moved to the coffee table, lifted a small remote resting near a framed photograph, pressed it. The widescreen on the wall burst alive. Grainy yet undeniable footage rolled from hidden cameras, in kitchen and living room. No soft music, no excuses, only raw sound, the sting of slaps, Jacob's hoarse cries, Victoria's sharp reprimands about diluted milk and obedience. Victoria lurched to her feet, color draining, then surging crimson. "You staged this, it's edited lies." She clawed for the folder, dragging it toward herself. Richard stiffened, then cleared his throat, attempting composure. "Mr. Reed, context matters. Household footage is rarely absolute. I suggest we speak privately." Alexander did not grant him a glance. His hand fast-forwarded the feed, revealing Victoria, snatching a bottle from Jacob, striking Sophia across the shoulder. The image, crystal precise, the audio harsh. Victoria's face, twisted hair, gripped fist, shaking her voice. Cutting through the room, "This property was always meant to be mine." The room hung heavy. Richard shifted uneasily, his polished authority slipping, while Victoria trembled, caught between fury and fear. The children silent nearby, their eyes wide, reflecting. A truth that no argument could erase. Alexander stood steady. his silence heavier than accusation. The evidence spoke in his place. It's not for any child to ruin everything. Sophia, trembling, held Jacob close against the wall, hearing her stepmother's voice. The boy began crying louder. Alexander tilted his head toward the door and spoke calm yet firm now. The door opened. Detective Daniel Harris entered with 2 officers. Harris, around 40, moved with steady authority, his voice low and strong, the kind shaped by years of handling child cases. He held a search warrant and an arrest order. His eyes scanned the screen, then rested on Sophia. "Are you okay?" Sophia gave a small nod, gripping her little brother tighter. Richard stepped forward, offering a business card. "I am her lawyer." My client. Harris said nothing. He turned to one officer, "Collect the storage devices, seal the files on the table." Just then the bell rang. A man in a dark shirt carrying a leather briefcase under his arm stepped in. As if he owned the place, Harris blocked him. "Name the man." Froze. "Anthony Blake, accountant." Harris gave a sharp nod and signaled his team arrest him on suspicion of fraud and embezzlement. Read him his rights immediately. The room filled with the strict rhythm of procedure. Richard paused, then tried to regain control. "You're mistaken. This is a civil case." Harris pointed at the screen where bank slips and transfer records appeared from the same file Anthony had brought in. "And this is financial proof. We already have confirmation from the bank." Victoria struggled as a female officer approached. "Don't touch me. You will regret this, Alexander. Without me, you are nothing." Her voice cracked, stripped of calm. She turned toward Sophia, her eyes burning with rage. "You ruined everything. That's enough." Alexander spoke quietly, but the words cut through. He walked to where the children were. Sophia stepped back, then froze when she saw him extend his arms for Jacob. Alexander lifted his son. Jacob cried once more, then slowly rested his head on his father's shoulder for the first time. Alexander felt the real warmth and weight of his son in his arms. He drew in a long breath, as though swallowing years of pain. "I'm sorry, son. I let you suffer for too long." Whispers rose from the hallway. The apartment door opened and a few curious neighbors paused at the scene. Patricia Gomez moved forward, polite yet unable to hide her anger. She stared at Victoria, who was now handcuffed and furious. "A mother like you should never be called a mother." Victoria glared but was escorted toward the door, the sound of her heels scraping the wooden floor. Harris turned, his voice lowered. "Mr. Reed, from now the children stay with you. We will assign a social worker to review the home. I also need to back up all the camera footage. Attorney Henry Collins is on his way to assist you." Alexander nodded. "Thank you." He looked at Sophia. "Are you hurt anywhere?" She shook her head, her eyes fixed on her father's strong hands holding Jacob safely. Richard stood cuffed beside Anthony at the door, still twisting his neck to glance back. "You'll hear from us. This isn't over." Harris motioned toward the hall. "Take them away." The elevator doors closed, leaving sudden silence in the once busy living room. On the screen, the last recording still played. Sophia on tiptoe placing the tender piece of meat into Jacob's bowl. Alexander held Jacob closer. The boy had stopped crying, his tired eyes slowly closing. Alexander bent down to meet Sophia's gaze. "I'm here." The simple words fell into the deep well of the girl's heart. Her small shoulders trembled, her breath caught. Sophia looked into her father's eyes, tears brimming, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Are you going to leave us again, Dad?" Alexander did not answer immediately. He knelt to her level, pulling both children into his chest. "Daddy is here," he said slowly, "and Daddy is staying." He stood, adjusted the blanket on Jacob's shoulders, then carried him back to the bedroom. When he laid him in the crib, Alexander went to the kitchen, grabbed the bottle, and fiddled with the formula. The water was a little too hot. He drew back his hand and exhaled sharply. Sophia stood pressed against the cupboard, lips tight, afraid he might get it wrong. Alexander lifted his head, spoke softly, "Remind me of the ratio." Sophia stepped forward, halfway pointing with her finger, 2 scoops up to this line. He nodded and followed it exactly. Only when Jacob sucked on the bottle did Sophia finally release her grip on the side of the crib. In the following days, Alexander got up at night himself to feed Jacob, change diapers, learned to shift the baby from one arm to the other, learned to soothe him with a steady rhythm of his hand. Sophia still stayed cautious. She often stood at the doorway ready to rush in if Jacob cried. Many times Alexander wanted to speak but held back. He knew she didn't need promises. She needed to see he was truly there. One night, Jacob spiked, a fever. The thermometer shot up. His little face flushed red, eyes dazed. Alexander lifted him, heart pounding. "Get my coat," he said, voice shaking. Sophia scrambled for a thick jacket from the closet. They raced to the elevator and out to the car. The night wind cut cold and Alexander held Jacob tight against his chest. On the drive to the hospital, he kept repeating to himself, "Don't leave me, Jacob, don't leave me." In the back seat, Sophia pressed close to him for the first time, resting her head on her father's shoulder, small breaths trembling with fear. The emergency ward was bright white. A young nurse named Carla met them, her voice calm and clear. "Put the baby here." The pediatrician, Dr. Benjamin Carter, examined him quickly, lowered the fever, and explained electrolytes gently. "It's a viral fever. Keep him hydrated, watch closely. If he has trouble breathing or has a seizure, come back immediately." Alexander nodded again and again, his eyes never leaving Jacob. Sophia sat beside them, hands clasped as if in prayer. When the fever finally eased, Jacob drifted into sleep. Alexander leaned back against the wall and for the first time let out a long, slow breath. They returned home near dawn. Sophia followed her father into the kitchen, lit the kettle herself, and prepared a mild ginger tea. "Drink this, Daddy." Alexander accepted the cup, smiling faintly. "Thank you." He glanced up at the clock on the wall, then back at his daughter. "You'll stay home from school this morning, I'll write a note." Sophia nodded, her eyes no longer looking away, though shadows still lingered within them. That afternoon the doorbell rang. Emily Parker stood outside, wearing a long coat and holding a paper bag. "I came by to visit," she said with a gentle smile. Sophia lit up with joy. Emily opened the bag and took out a few small cartons of milk and some storybooks. She looked at Alexander. "You have to be patient. She doesn't need promises. She needs to see that you truly stay." Alexander stood still for a moment before replying, "I understand." Emily turned to Sophia. "I'll be here for a while, okay?" Sophia leaned against her teacher briefly, rediscovering an old reflex. News of Victoria's arrest spread quickly through the building. The neighborhood shifted ever so slightly. Patricia Gomez knocked on the door carrying a pot of hot chicken soup for the children. She said nothing else, just placing her hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. Later that afternoon, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile arrived from Chelsea Diner, introducing herself. "I'm Maggie Lewis. I own the diner at the corner. Patricia told me so. I brought some milk and soft bread. If you need a hot meal, call me." Alexander, still a bit unsettled, accepted thank you. Maggie shook her head. "We're neighbors." That simple statement cracked part of the ice wall he had built around himself. Night fell, and the apartment carried a new kind of peace. Jacob slept deeply, his cheeks rosy after the fever. Sophia sat at the table with a new red notebook, writing, slowly, carefully as if the words might hurt something fragile. Alexander passed by, stopping at the doorway but not entering. He saw her small hand tremble slightly on the pen, then steady. Sophia closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer, and locked it carefully, as though protecting a seed. Days went by, the rhythm at home slow but steady. Alexander set the alarm to prepare milk on time. Sophia readied towels and changed diapers. They didn't speak much, but every gesture began to fit together like music regaining its rhythm. In the evenings, Alexander made hot cocoa for his daughter. "Drink this." Sophia inhaled the smell, whispering softly, "Mom used to make it too." Alexander lowered his face into the rising steam. "I know." He stayed silent for a while, then added the words he had owed her for a long time. "I'm sorry, Sophia." On Sunday night, while Sophia was in the bath, Alexander opened the desk drawer to grab a towel. His eyes fell on the red notebook. He hesitated, placing his hand on it and pulling back. But finally, he opened it. The first page was short, neatly written, without the trembling lines of the old notebook. Today, Dad carried my brother, and... He laughed. On the next page, short scattered lines appeared. Dad made milk himself. Dad read a story. Dad stayed home all evening. Alexander closed the notebook, a warm feeling spreading through him, both strange and familiar. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Olivia's framed picture on the wall. Her eyes in the photo were still gentle, as if waiting for an answer. Alexander drew a deep breath, his voice low and steady, like sending a message into the void. Olivia, I kept my promise to you. Tears rolled slowly down his cheeks. At the door, Sophia walked back in with her cup of cocoa. She saw her father wiping his eyes, but didn't ask anything. She set the cup down and pulled her chair closer. Jacob shifted in his crib, breathing evenly. The three of them sat quietly for a while. No one spoke, but the room felt warmer, as though someone had just added logs to the fire. In the hall, Patricia closed her own door and exhaled in relief. At the corner, Maggie pinned a small note in her kitchen. Soup for the Reed family tomorrow night. On the class bulletin board, Emily posted a blue slip. Parents support group meeting next week. Invisible threads wove together, strong enough for a fractured family to hold on and rise again. That night, when Alexander tucked Sophia into bed, she opened her eyes and whispered, I'm not as afraid as before anymore. Alexander touched her hair gently. I know. He turned toward Jacob, placing his hand over his small chest, rising and falling, evenly. In the silence, he noticed another rhythm, steady and patient, stitching together the parts of his heart that had once been broken. The next morning, Alexander woke before the alarm. He prepared milk for Jacob, placed the bottle in his son's hands, then opened his laptop right at the kitchen table. He typed a headline slowly, as if afraid to disturb something fragile that had just begun to heal. Hope Haven Center Founding Plan. He called Henry Collins. I need to file the legal paperwork for a non-profit center as soon as possible. Henry answered briefly, All right, sign this afternoon. 3 days later, a woman with short brown hair arrived at the apartment. I'm Erin Morales, she introduced herself. I used to be a social worker. Now I coordinate programs for abandoned children. Erin spoke little, her voice steady. She read through the plan, then looked up. You have a clear goal. We'll start with a small kitchen, a counseling room, and a learning corner. I'll gather volunteers. Alexander nodded. Thank you. I don't want a place that looks pretty in pictures. I want a place where kids feel safe. City Hall quickly approved the license. Maggie Lewis brought pastries, smiling for the opening. You need the smell of a kitchen. Patricia Gomez carried in a box of children's books, speaking firmly. The reading corner must be full. Emily Parker showed up holding a box of crayons. I'll take care of the small afternoon classes. Erin, arrange the duty schedule, bringing in 2 psychology students. Let me introduce you, she said, pointing to Jared and Mia. Both had summer camp experience. Jared was tall and slender, with a gentle smile. Mia spoke softly, her eyes full of attention. On cleanup day, Sophia stood by the blank wall, brush in hand. Alexander handed her a box of paints. What do you want to draw? The little girl stared at the space for a long moment before sketching the first lines, each stroke slow and deliberate. Erin read aloud the words Sophia had written with both hands. Family is where no one is left behind. She turned to Alexander. That's the soul of this place. Sophia gave a faint smile. Jacob sat nearby in the stroller, waving his hands in the air to the rhythm of laughter around him. Weeks passed, and Hope Haven began to breathe on its own. The kitchen corner was always warm. A small room with 2 armchairs served for counseling. A bulletin board listed shifts. Alexander didn't walk around like a boss, but like an apprentice. He asked Erin about the intake process, asked Jared about setting up the safe space, asked Emily about suitable reading lessons. Every answer was like laying another brick onto his trust in himself. News of Victoria's trial arrived through Henry's email. Convicted of child abuse and financial fraud. Henry said over the phone. 3 years in prison plus probation, banned from contact with children. Alexander stayed silent for a few seconds. I won't attend the press conference. Henry understood. You're doing the right thing. After the verdict, social media overflowed with condemnation. Alexander shut the screen. He lifted Jacob, resting the boy's head on his shoulder. We don't live by throwing stones, he told himself. We live by the work we do. One afternoon, the activity room floor was covered with a new rug. Aaron checked inventory when Sophia called softly, Dad, look. Jacob was standing unsteadily by the arm of a chair, his chubby legs testing each step. Alexander knelt, arms wide. Open, come here, son. Jacob looked at him, smiled, then took a wobbly step, another one. Cheers erupted through the room. Jacob toppled into his father's arms. Alexander held him tight, the emptiness in his chest filling as if sealed. Sophia clapped, her eyes glowing like a light just switched on. On Christmas Eve, Hope Haven set up a tree in the backyard. Strings of lights glowed warmly. The children sang Silent Night, their voices young but in harmony. Maggie handed out hot cocoa. Patricia offered cookies. Emily guided the kids to hang paper stars. Aaron checked her list, whispering to Alexander, Everyone's here today. He looked around. The children stood close together. No one left out. Sophia, in a red coat, clutched her father's arm. Dad, can I hang this? She held up a small handwritten sign. Family is where no one is left behind. Alexander nodded. Hang it at the very top. A small voice called from behind. Dad? Alexander froze in place. He turned around. Jacob was looking at him, his mouth opening once more, clear and full. Dad? No one shouted, but every face around them was smiling. Alexander lifted his son into his arms, holding him close but not too tightly. Sophia leaned against her father's chest, listening to the steady, warm rhythm of his heartbeat. Did you hear that? Alexander whispered softly, his voice trembling yet tender. He just called me Dad. At the end of the evening, Aaron brought over a new list of donations. Someone wants to sponsor small scholarships for the children old enough to attend school, she said, her eyes bright but steady. But we will be transparent. We will do this the right way. Alexander signed his name at the bottom line, then looked up. Thank you, everyone. He touched each hand offered to him, not only as a formality, but as a promise carried forward. When the lights dimmed, the final notes of the song still lingered in the courtyard. Sophia looked at her father, her smile radiant, her eyes no longer clouded by fear. Jacob slept in Alexander's arms, his breathing calm and light. Snowflakes drifted from the sky. Alexander tilted his face upward, then lowered his gaze to his two children. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if to let every word rest exactly where it belonged. We have lost too much, but from now on there will be only light. The story does not close with revenge, but with a new path. A place where justice speaks, where hearts choose what is right, where the wicked are punished, the good are rewarded, and a father learns again what it means to be a father. That is the message I want to leave with you. Sometimes the light arrives late, but it always comes to those who persist in defending kindness. Hope Haven is not just a center. It is a promise that no one will be left behind. What do you think about the moment when Alexander held Jacob and whispered his apology? If it were you, what would you do when caught between fear and the truth? Do you believe that one timely word of stop can save an entire childhood? And if you were in Sophia's place, how would you send a signal for help? And to whom? Please share your perspective, because every comment might be a lifeline for someone who needs it. I also want to check in with you today. Are you doing okay? Has anything this week left you feeling worn out? If you are going through a difficult time, leave a few words here and I, along with this community, will listen. This is a place for heartwarming, emotional stories, a place where we remind each other that kindness still abounds. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you long to hold close. Who knows? It might be the very ray of light someone has been waiting for.